Good morning. My name is Michelle Cousins, and I am really happy to be here with you this morning. Before I do our welcome, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself in case you don't know who I am. My husband and I started attending UU Danbury with our family back in 2010. And since that time, well, I've done just a couple of things around here. I was on membership, hospitality. I helped with the auction at times. I've taught OWL. I was on the board for 4 years, and I am currently the captain of Team 4 at Dorothy Day, and I'm also the co-chair of the RAMT with Kristen Papucci. So that's just a little bit about me and my involvement here. As you can tell, maybe from my enthusiasm as I'm sharing how much I really love being a part of this wonderful community. And I'm so glad that you could be with us this morning as I welcome you to our online service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. I'm so happy that each of you are able to join us this morning, and together in community, we can ensure that social distancing does not mean social disengagement. Our weekly services are more than just a gathering of our physical bodies. It's the forming of a sacred time that we make together. Whether you're well-versed in the technology of teleconferencing, or this is your first venture, we welcome you. For those of you new among us or reconnecting with fonder hearts, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you came from if you're comfortable. Whatever the faith tradition of your past, whatever your theological stance, whatever your heritage, whoever you are and whoever you love, we welcome you. You can learn more about us on our Facebook page, and we also encourage you to share that Facebook page and reach out to others who might be isolated during this time and might benefit from the spiritual connection with our loving community. I have just a couple of announcements for you this morning. The book conversation group is going to be meeting this Thursday at 7. If you'd like more information or the Zoom link, reach out to Marianne Kula. The deadline for the June comment is this Friday, so make sure that you email Sherry by 9 a.m. And we also have our annual meeting coming up. So that's going to be on June 6th following our service. And today, after our service, I invite you to stay and participate in a breakout group for individual connection and deeper check-ins. Again, I'd like to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury, where we welcome all in the spirit of compassion, inquiry, and service. And now, if you would join me in our chalice lighting affirmation, the words are in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another and celebrate life.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you have brought a candle or chalice close by and lit it along with us. Happy mid-May spring morning to you. It is good to be with you this morning. We can feel spring bursting forth all around us now, and that also always signals, to me anyway, that summer is around the corner. There is an urgency to savoring these days, just as they are, before it gets too hot or humid, as we anticipate the changes, transitions, travel, and whirling round that summer may well bring. So too, we are in a period of culmination and transition in our congregational life, preparing for transitions on the board, on various committees, among the children and youth as they age and graduate, in the minister's office, the upcoming all-congregational annual meeting on June 6th, while also trying to keep up with all the ways that the latest pandemic updates impact our community as well. Thank you to each and every one of you for your part in supporting and guiding this community forward. And if you are newer among us or visiting after some time away, welcome. This is a loving and energetic congregation, and everyone plays a crucial part in the compassion and commitment we foster here. The light of hope, peace, and love here shines upon each face. May these things conjure up in us the faith that will guide our journey home. Come, let us worship together. Join me in singing with Jerry, Morning Has Come.
Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. A new day dawns, once more the gift is here. Wonder fills this moment shared together. The light of peace here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. Open our eyes to see that life abounds. Open hearts to welcome it among us. The light of love who shines upon each face. May bring it faith to guide our journey home.
Good morning. It is good to be together. If there are children and youth who are in the room but not near the screen, I invite you to come on over because I'm going to tell a story to you in a couple of minutes. And while you're on your way over, I want to say that I am so excited that some of you will be coming to make some art, to do some painting today. Please note the time change of this event in your family's email, and I will see you soon. Also, 12th graders, please don't forget today's bridging preparation session at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And in case there is any question, masks are still required when we meet in person. Let's say together our children's affirmation, the words for which are printed in your order of service. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. Here's a story I wrote, and it's called Just the Story. Claudia was the youngest kid in a very busy house. When she was a baby, Claudia's parents had to go to work early in the morning. So Claudia's grandfather wrapped a sling around his chest, put her in it, and carried her everywhere. This is how Claudia learned about the world. Claudia learned that good food nourishes not just the mind, but also the spirit by watching grandfather cook breakfast, pack 6 lunches for Claudia's siblings, and sometimes even start dinner before any of the other children woke up in the morning. Claudia learned that routine and order can be comforting by watching grandfather make his bed, wash his face, brush his teeth, and give the bathroom sink a good wipe down, just as he gave the kitchen sink a good cleaning every evening. And Claudia learned that not everyone had an easy time making order by watching her siblings get ready for their days. Some in a frantic, chaotic rush, some with a slow reluctance, and others with pep and enthusiasm. By the time Claudia was a few years old, she had become a big part of grandfather's daily routines. When grandfather walked to the post office or the library or the market, Claudia would join him in greeting those they met along the way. And she helped grandfather drop off the mail, pick up books, or buy groceries. When grandfather did the laundry, Claudia would fold the towels, and when he vacuumed, she would make sure that the floor was clear of toys. When Claudia was 5, she went to school for the first time. Her favorite part of every day was morning circle. Mr. Smith, Claudia's teacher, would sing a welcome song that included everybody's names. Then he would ask a different child every day to put the number of the day on a magnetic calendar and ask someone else to look out the window, check the weather, and add a weather symbol to the calendar. But the thing Claudia loved most about her day was morning circle. Mr. Smith would always read a story to the children. Stories reminded Claudia of her grandfather. He had a story to go along with just about anything. When Claudia was waiting with grandfather at the bus stop, he had a story about his uncle learning to drive a bus. When Claudia was helping to take out the trash, grandfather had a story about a dog who used to live at the dump. And when Claudia spotted a bunny in the park, grandfather had a story with a bunny and a duck in it. Claudia heard so many stories from grandfather that she got really good at figuring out what would happen in the stories before the storyteller revealed their endings. That was what Claudia enjoyed most about story time with Mr. Smith. She liked figuring out what would happen, as if she were figuring out a puzzle before anyone else knew. Sometimes she couldn't help herself and would blurt it out. Mr. Smith would look at her with a twinkle in his eye, give her a little wink, and say quietly to the class, "Let's keep reading and find out if that's what happens." And that's the way it went on, day after day, for many months, until one day Mr. Smith read a most unusual story, a story with twists and turns Claudia had never expected, and an ending she never would have guessed. Did Claudia delight in this new challenge? No, she did not. Claudia had never been so stumped, and she did not like it at all. The horse in the story won a race by going slowly. It seemed like the little child in the story was going to change what happened, but then the little child didn't change anything at all. The sun and the moon played important roles that the sun and moon have never, ever played in real life, or even in another story. Stories, thought Claudia, had certain ways they were supposed to go. This story had broken the rules, she determined. And since it wasn't like the other stories, she figured something must be wrong with it. It didn't make any sense, she kept telling herself. It just didn't make any sense at all. If you don't like it, grandfather told her that afternoon, don't worry about it. There'll be a new story tomorrow. But Claudia did worry about it. It kept bugging her all that day, and after another story the next day, and even after the story the day after that. I know, Claudia thought while trying to swing across the monkey bars at recess. If the story doesn't make sense, I can just rewrite it. I'll make it make sense. In the afternoon, Mr. Smith let the children have what he called independent reading time. The room would be very quiet, and all the kids got to look at books on their own. The children could sit anywhere they wanted during independent reading time, and Claudia's favorite place to sit was on a big cushion behind some cubbies. It would be the perfect spot. I don't have any crayons. I just have markers, so you'll have to use your imagination. Claudia took some crayons from inside her desk and put them in her pocket. Then she went to the bins of books Mr. Smith kept on a table and found the bright yellow bin where he had put that nonsense book the other day. She flipped through the books in the bin until she found that ridiculous story. She took it out of the bin and made her way to her little spot behind the cubbies. Claudia felt her whole body relax as she sat with the book. Finally, she could fix the story. She opened the book to the first page. She wasn't able to read all the words yet, but to her, the story was in the pictures as much as it was in the words, and so she set to work drawing. She used a dark purple crayon to scribble out any pictures that didn't fit. She scrubbed the crayon hard against the page so the picture wouldn't be seen. Then she drew her own pictures, a horse that ran fast, a child that gave the horse what it needed at just the right moment so that the horse could win the race when its win didn't seem certain, a sun that shined brightly above them in the sky during the day, and a moon to shine down on them in the darkness. When she finished drawing, Claudia looked proudly at her work, and she wondered when someone would open the book and see the incredible story she had created. She closed the book happily, took it back to the yellow bin, and put it in the very front of all the other books so that someone might see it and decide to read it. Every day that week, Claudia watched the bin during independent reading time, just waiting for someone to select the once ridiculous but now amazing story. And every day, the book was left in the bin. Of course, Claudia thought, that was such a bad story. Nobody wants to read it. I better put something on the cover so that they know it's not the same. During the next independent reading time, Claudia got back out her crayons, put them in her pocket, picked up the book, and went back to her spot behind the cubbies. But what to draw that would make someone want to read the story? Claudia sat very still, thinking for a few minutes. Then it came to her. All the cover needed was a little bling, a little sparkle, something to say, "This book shines." So Claudia picked her brightest, blingiest, most sparkliest colors from her crayons and began to draw lines and dots everywhere on the cover, like fireworks. There was pink and orange and lots of bright yellow, shiny like gold, and a good match for the bin where the book would be found. She made sure that plenty of her marks were at the top of the book, the part that could be seen when the book was at the front of the bin. "This is perfect," Claudia said out loud to herself with a satisfied giggle. "Just perfect." And she slipped her crayons back in her pocket, walked with a smile on her face back to the bin, and put it back in the spot she had made for it right at the front. "Claudia," she heard Mr. Smith say with a voice clear and strong. And suddenly her face began to flush, warm as the sun, it seemed. What would Mr. Smith think about her coloring on books? She hadn't thought of that. But she did remember with a rush that grandfather had told her at some point not to do it. "Yes," Claudia responded to Mr. Smith, anticipating with dread what he would say next. "Please come here," he said seriously. And she walked nervously to where he sat across the room. Then Mr. Smith looked straight at Claudia without smiling and said, "Do you need help finding a book?" Now, nobody knows why Mr. Smith wouldn't have noticed the drawings Claudia had made on the cover of that book at the front of the yellow bin. But if he had noticed them, he never said a word. Instead, Mr. Smith guided Claudia to look for a new book in the blue bin. And when she found one, he smiled and turned to another child. But something about that fear of having been found out troubled Claudia. What if Mr. Smith would realize what she'd done? Would he have to buy a new copy of the story to replace the one she'd drawn on? No, she thought, it was a bad story, so why would he replace it? But then again, if it was a bad story, Why did he choose to share it with the whole class? Why did he share it? Claudia kept asking herself this question all day, and she fell asleep thinking of the question that night. When she woke up, Claudia felt a little sick, the way people sometimes feel when they're worried or something is bothering them. She almost dreaded going to school. Why did he share it? Claudia kept asking herself all morning, but the answer didn't seem obvious at all. At lunchtime, Claudia didn't notice the other children. She was too lost in her thoughts, trying to remember the story, the original story, before it had been changed. When independent reading time started, Claudia went back to the yellow bin. She slowly took out the book she had drawn on and returned to her usual spot behind the cubbies. She opened the book to the first page, held it very near her eyes, and tried to look for the picture that had been hidden by the purple crayon. As she looked, the story began to come back to her. There was magic there in the images behind the purple crayon, magic that she had missed the first time she had heard the story, and even the second time she looked at the pages when she drew on them. There was a story of things that didn't make sense to her yet, but that made more sense the more time she gave it to grow in her heart. She leaned back against the cushion and rested with the story for a while, this time on its own terms. The horse was meant to win the race, but not in the way she expected. The child was there to observe alongside the reader, not to change things. And the sun and the moon, they were the mystery that shone bright on the book, making magic the whole time. Each day over the next week or so, Claudia found herself returning to this book. She would take it from its bin, hold it close, and remember the story she once tried to rewrite. By the end of the week, it seemed as if there was a little pocket of love in her heart for this story. Not because it was her own, not because she could make it her own, but because it was what it was. And somehow it had made her heart soft and open in a way that she liked. With that pocket of love, though, it seemed that regret was also growing. She had been so busy after she heard Mr. Smith read the story, so busy telling her own story, that she hadn't left any room for this one. Then she had tried to get rid of it, and now it was gone, and no other child could have their heart open from it. She didn't even want to look at the book now, see all the glam she once had so proudly added to the cover. She started hiding it in the back of the bin, but every time Mr. Smith said her name, it made her stomach do a flip, waiting to know if this was the time when he would tell her he found her crayon marks. Her regret was turning into dread, but fortunately an idea was also coming to her, and she knew her grandfather would help her if she asked. One morning, Claudia came to school a little early. Her grandfather was with her, and they had a paper bag with them. When they got to Claudia's classroom, they handed Mr. Smith the paper bag, and when he opened it, he saw that it was a fresh copy of the book about the horse that won the race by going slow. Claudia told Mr. Smith that she had drawn on his copy of the book and that this book was meant to make it right. Mr. Smith thanked Claudia for the book, handed it back to her, and asked her to go replace the other copy in the bin. And so she did. She never did tell Mr. Smith exactly why she had drawn on the book, and he never asked, but she had fixed her mistake. And now the story was there for other children to be puzzled by on other days. And Claudia's crayons were still in her desk, ready for all of the times when it would be her turn to tell her own stories. And that's the end of our story. Let's move now into a time of sharing our own stories, milestones, and life changes. You're invited during this time to share in the chat those personal milestones that are lifting up your heart or weighing it down today, and to please reach out to one another to offer support and affirmation. And you can do this privately or chat with everyone. I also want to acknowledge how much is happening in the world and in our communities right now, and that we hold so much in our hearts in this time. So it's all the more important to lift one another up and let one another know how we're doing on this day.
Now we come to the time for our congregational offering and share the plate. This is your
Come back, Margaret. You muted yourself by accident. We heard you come on. and say, now is the time for the share the plate. Now we can see you.
This may be a problem if it's going to mute when I switch to another screen to read my notes. Let's see. Let's see if it mutes again. Hang on. Is it muted now, or can you hear me?
Nope, we can hear you. Carry on.
Okay, well, I hope this works. Now we come to the time for our congregational offering and share the plate. This is your chance to support UUCD in the work that we do. Today's Share the Plate recipient is the Connecticut Workers Center, a 501c3 nonprofit group that supports domestic workers in Connecticut. Domestic workers include housekeepers and in-home care providers for family members who can't take care of themselves. Many of these people who care for others are immigrants. Many had their hours cut or lost their jobs when the pandemic started. A lot of them aren't eligible for programs like unemployment, food stamps, or Medicaid. The Connecticut Workers Center has been providing emergency help with food, rent, and medical care. They also provide emotional support. They work with parents struggling to help children who are doing online schooling in English, which is often a language barrier. They provide job training, and they lobby for bills to protect and enforce workers' rights. They would like help with legal aid. They're always looking for local lawyers throughout the state who could do pro bono work in wage enforcement or immigration. 40% of their members have requested legal help for wage theft and discrimination. They would like to provide computers to their community organizers who are their links with their members. The Connecticut Workers Center has over 1,200 members from cities throughout the state, and they serve more than 30 families in Danbury. If you are with us for the first time, feel free to pass the virtual plate. Your presence here today is your gift to us. But if you'd like to support UUCD and the Connecticut Workers Center, you can click the link in the chat. Even though we're not in our sacred space on Clapboard Ridge Road, we are creating our holy place together here online, and we still have virtually all the same operating expenses. You can also mail a check to UUCD at 24 Clapboard Ridge Road in Danbury. Please be sure to put today's date, May 16th, in the memo section. Thank you for doing your part to support and sustain both UUCD and the community that we are all a part of. And now please join me in our congregational response. In the spirit of compassion and service, we dedicate these, our offerings.
Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel way in the middle of the air. The big wheel run by faith, little wheel run by the grace of God. Little wheel way in the middle of the air. Some go to church for to sing and shout, way in the middle of the air. But for 6 months they shouted out, way in the middle of the air. Don't let me tell you what a hypocrite will do, way in the middle of the air. He'll talk about me and he'll talk about you, way in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel way in the middle of the air. Don't pray for things that you don't need, way in the middle of the air. The Lord don't like no sin and greed, way in the middle of the air. There's one sure thing that you can't do, way in the middle of the air. You can't serve God and Satan too, way in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel way in the middle of the air. One of these days, about 12
Thanks so much to Jerry for sharing this song with us all. Hope it's familiar to some of you. I grew up listening to a version of this song sung by Sally Rogers and Claudia Schmidt. Their version likely drew upon a version by Woody Guthrie. Then I had the incredible privilege of being present for the Reverend Sana Saeed's ordination, wonderfully online, and listening to many incredible speakers, including the powerful Reverend Ranwa Hamami, who gave the charge to the people. Reverend Ranwa's charge named the cycles of effort and dysfunction in our communities and our world, as compared to bending the arc toward justice that so many Unitarian Universalists, among others, refer to so often. Reverend Ranwa's wisdom about how sometimes we can find ourselves just riding that wheel around and around through its cycles instead of actively bending the arc, combined with the call from people of color within Unitarian Universalism to adopt the eighth principle, pulled this Ezekiel Saw the Wheel song out of the depths of my being, and it's been in my head and heart on repeat since. So I have read this past week so many different synopses or interpretations of Ezekiel's wheel over the centuries that I've come to feel, at least for now, like it's a Zen koan. What is the wheel inside the wheel? One scholar explains it this way. The wheel-like image in the book of Ezekiel represents the universe and the path we travel through this world and the afterlife, and it stands for the enduring connections between this world and the next, the power from above and below. My dog-eared HarperCollins Study Bible, New Revised Standard Version, commonly known as the NRSV, tells me that Ezekiel and the book associated with him have puzzled readers for centuries. According to some Jewish traditions, this book was only to be read by those over 30 years of age. What I came away with is that the essence, the timelessness of the song is in the title, really. Ezekiel had a vision. Ezekiel saw a better version of how things could be. And in the different lyrics that I've heard sung, that is the common thread, seeing through the noise of our present day lives and our complicated present day world, and seeing the beauty of what could be possible. It's the song composed by Black American musician William Dawson, sometime in the 1930s or 40s, that churns inside me over and over. Big wheel runs by faith, little wheel runs by the grace of God. It's a wheel in a wheel, way in the middle of the air. My lifelong Unitarian Universalist mind had to sit with this chorus for a while to find meaning in it. In the same way that Sierra Marie's character Claudia had to sit with the story for a while to find some meaning in it, in its mystery. This week, what I came to feeling is that the wheels signify our effort to find the balance of holding firmly to what we believe and what we know to be true, while simultaneously surrendering to and accepting that which we cannot control. The big wheel runs by faith. The little wheel runs by the grace of God. What does this have to do with the eighth principle, which this congregation will vote on whether or not to adopt at the upcoming June 6th annual meeting? You may well be wondering. For me, the convergence occurred while soaking in the wisdom of Reverend Ranwa's words, as I mentioned earlier. Reverend Ranwa was reflecting upon her relationship with Reverend Sana that began at a UUA-funded Institute for Multicultural Leadership many years ago now, reflecting upon the bittersweet truth that many, if not most, aspects of that program are no longer funded and no longer occur, and how common that story is. Initiatives get energized, hailed, and tried, and then discarded or forgotten in favor of other newer ideas and initiatives or lesser programs that involve less of an investment. How do we break the cycle? Reverend Ranwa asked of us. The cycle is familiar. There is certainly a critique of the Unitarian Universalist denomination's approach to anti-racism work that we have cycled through this and that approach, and then this other effort. This pattern is one of the reasons that the proposed eighth principle makes so much sense to me, because incorporating this commitment into our principles, one of our very, very few common texts bridging one Unitarian Universalist community to another, incorporating this commitment into our principles with which we covenant to affirm and promote, is as close as we come to engraving it over our doorways, putting it front and center in a way that it cannot just be shoved to the back of the filing cabinet or lost to an out-of-date website. There are many books, but this is just one. The Arc of the Universe is Long, referencing that arc, right? Unitarian Universalists, Anti-Racism, and the Journey from Calgary. This tome is just one of several books you can acquire to read the remarkable efforts of Unitarian Universalists over the years to address anti-racism. But it is easy for it to just get put on the shelf, right? Way back in 2017, the Black Lives of UU, or Blue Organizing Collective, encouraged all Unitarian Universalists to advocate for the formal adoption of this eighth principle, articulating a commitment to the dismantling of white supremacy within the stated principles of our faith. The Blue Organizing Collective affirms the work of those who have supported the adoption of the eighth principle and asks why there has been no sustained commitment by the association to formally adopt it as an explicit cornerstone of our faith. No formal adoption, no sustained commitment yet. I always have to add the yet because I see momentum and I see the possibility coming. Perhaps you find yourself thinking that we talk about anti-racism work and the prevalence of racism and other oppressions too much already. Just this past week, though, Republicans in the Texas House passed a bill that effectively bans public school teachers from talking about racism, white supremacy, or current news events in the classroom. MSNBC reports that roughly a dozen states have just recently proposed legislation that prohibits discussion of systemic racism and divisive concepts in public school classrooms. Journalist and biographer John Meacham compares this national inflection point to the really still ongoing tension around teaching evolution versus creationism, or climate change versus climate change is real versus climate change denial. I know when I keep hearing national politicians and journalists referring of late to the big lie, I'm like, which one, right? There are multiple big lies that continue to be promulgated. Once again, we as Unitarian Universalists have to wrestle with what matters in our relatively small niche. We can and must push ourselves to have conversations even when we are feeling uncomfortable, even when we don't like the story, and persist with what we know to be true, what we know needs to be said. Passing the eighth principle, congregation by UU congregation, at least communicates to others within our denomination that we are taking our commitment to heed the call of UUs of color seriously. It also signals that taking actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions is not just something we're going to chat about doing today and forget about tomorrow. making this principle a central part of our faith's covenant. Our covenant with one another as individuals and as congregations is about doing more than just discussing words. It is about giving our word and following through on that commitment in all the ways that we are able. Just last Saturday, May 8th, all of the Canadian Unitarian Council member congregations voted to adopt the 8th principle at the CUC's annual general meeting. Over 40 congregations in the US have now passed or adopted the 8th principle. And here's one of the things. There are infinite opportunities for all of us to get tangled up in the knots of endless discussion. And meanwhile, lives are being lost because of the systemic racism and gross financial inequities in this country that have only become far more acute and pronounced during this pandemic. During the February 7th UUCD service, Sierra Marie offered a shortened version of the proposed 8th principle for kids. Build a beloved community free from racism and oppression. I encourage any of you who missed that full and useful service or who don't remember it now, some months ago, coordinated by the Racial Justice Forum, to take it in, and I've put the direct link to that service in the chat. The UUCD Racial Justice Forum has offered so many opportunities to consider and learn more about adopting the 8th principle as a congregation. Their efforts so far have included a survey of the congregation regarding understanding and questions, an introductory town hall, a Sunday service led by Paula Cole-Jones, co-author of the 8th principle, participatory classes and workshops, and a wonderful document that is linked from your This Week, every week, that lets you know all the different, some of the many different available resources you could look into or actions you could take. Sam McCoy's class, Black Voices from the 20th Century and Beyond, an Introduction to Race, Identity, and Justice, has, I know, allowed many of you to go deeper than you would otherwise. And that February 7th service, which I again commend to you as an excellent one to watch or to watch again. So in all these words about words, what matters? In all these words about words, what matters? To me, that is a crucial lifelong quest, not just a question of Unitarian Universalism. What really matters to us, to me, to you, to those not yet present in this conversation? What really matters? And once we remind ourselves of what matters, once we clear away the brush and find again the burning flame of clarity, what do we do then? I believe that our intuition knows more often than our conscious minds do when things are not right, when we have done harm, or when we have more to learn. I know that I've learned more about Ezekiel saw the wheel than I had realized there was to know, particularly that the original African-American spiritual was composed by a Black composer who I'd never heard of and should have. Similarly, Sierra Marie's story featured a young person who acted in a way that they knew was wrong, but they had to sit with what they'd done for a while before they could understand and repair their actions. There is always more for us to learn and understand, and taking action to prioritize that learning is something we can do for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. Just one example from another book that sits on my shelf and that I'll be handing off to Sierra Marie before moving to Delaware is this wonderful book, also a tome of fascinating research, African American Connecticut Explored. I doubt any of you have this book on your shelf, not because you wouldn't be interested in it, but because I found it very hard to find. And I found it like tucked away in the Harriet Beecher Stowe bookstore, Harriet Beecher Stowe Center bookstore, which is an amazing treasure all on its own. And it's a book I haven't seen referenced anywhere. So I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much information in here. Just one example of literally something I flipped open to. Did you know that Connecticut's property-owning free Blacks could vote in local and national elections throughout the 18th century, the 1700s? But in 1814, the state denied all African American suffrage as such explicit laws spread across the country. That statute gave Connecticut the dubious distinction of being the only state in New England to disenfranchise its Black population. In other words, Black people could vote here. Free property owning Blacks, which there were, could vote here in the 1700s, and then we went backwards. In other words, that cycle, right? That cycle of movement forward and then reverting back and going along with others in reverting back to a less progressive way of being. That cycle has been occurring here in Connecticut for hundreds of years. This is not surprising, and yet the facts that we don't learn and the history we don't know are sometimes surprising to me still. In the same way that Ezekiel saw the wheel filled my soul this week, and you can listen to very different versions of it for hours online, and in the way that the music that percolates up through my being guides me in feeling out what needs to be addressed. Many Sundays, there's a song that informs what I'm thinking about and trying to understand. So too should our Unitarian Universalist commitment to dismantle white supremacy culture whenever we see it arising and undermining our efforts to build truly beloved and loving community fill our congregational souls. This is deeply spiritual work. We are all ensnared in and by the traps of white supremacy culture. Let us join together with determination to keep our shoulders to that wheel and truly, finally, consistently, and robustly bend the arc towards justice. May it be so. Please join me now in a spirit of meditation and prayer. And just begin by taking a deep breath with me. Back in February, Marian DeFabio spoke about continuing on in the work of anti-racism and anti-oppression for as long as it may take. Breathe in that passion, that strength of commitment. This week, I've had the voices of Claudia Schmidt and Sally Rogers in my head over and over again, singing, "Let me tell you what a hypocrite'll do, way in the middle of the air. Talk about me, he'll talk about you, way in the middle of the air." Breathe in the determination to each do and own what is ours to do, and not to kvetch about others, what others should do. It's so easy to fall into that cycle, right? Let us each determine again and again to turn to what is ours to do and to extend grace to others, trusting that they will find their way. They will find their way. There is so much that we cannot change. So let us breathe into the commitment over and over again to do what we can. To do what we can. Amen, and blessed be. Join me now in singing with Jerry, Spirit of Life.
living life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
It is now time for us to extinguish our chalices. Please join me in our shared declaration. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again. Our closing hymn today might be a new one for you. It is a lovely one. Jerry will now lead us in Although This Life is But a Wraith.
Although this life is but a wraith, although we know not what we lose, although we grow with little faith, give me the heart to fight and lose. Open my ears to music, let me thrill with spring's first flutes and drums, but never let me dare forget the bitter ballad of the slums. Ever insurgent let me be, make me more daring than devout. From sleek contentment keep me free, and fill me with a buoyant doubt. From compromise and things half done, keep me with stern and stubborn pride. And when at last the fight is won, oh, keep me still unsatisfied.
From compromise and things half done. There are wonderful words in this hymn, which was recommended to me by Reverend Molly Brewer. I've never sung it before in my life until this week. So thank you for joining me in discovering this hymn anew. Although we grope with little faith, give me the heart to fight and lose. Ever insurgent let me be. Make me more daring than devout. From sleek contentment keep me free, and fill me with a buoyant doubt. May we move forward into our week with a buoyancy of knowing we are doing what we can, not all by ourselves, but together in community and in solidarity with others. I want to say thank you for being here today, each and every one of you. I miss you when I am not here with you on Sunday morning. It is only through our shared attention that we truly create this sacred space. And out of the sacred space emerges meaning we cannot find or feel nearly as clearly on our own. May you always remember that you are not expected to do it all by yourself, but neither are you a bystander. We each and all have a part to play in learning and teaching, growing and inspiring, calling ourselves and one another forth. Following the postlude, please do stay with us for breakout groups if you'd like, and if you're heading off into the rest of whatever this Sunday holds for you, during the postlude is a good time to do that. When you do close your screen and return to the tactile world around you, go with love in your heart, your spirit nourished by peace, your actions committed to creating greater justice in our shared world.